Thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm Dr. David Pendergrass. In this podcast, I want to play for you a recording of a discipleship lesson I gave for the people at First Methodist Church, Houston. I hope you enjoy. Today we're going to look at Matthew chapter 21. We'll look at his arrival. Matthew 21 at the very beginning. Now, Matthew 21 covers two deeply significant events, okay? His entry into Jerusalem and his condemnation of the religious leadership at the temple. Now, so far in the text, right before here, Jesus has made it clear to his disciples that he's going to Jerusalem. It's going to involve beating and death and a resurrection. Those disciples still think this is going to involve a lot of victory. And nevertheless, we'll see that Jesus' predictions will come true. Now, in Matthew chapter 21, verse 1, it says, "And when they drew near to Jerusalem and came near," your translation probably says Bethphage. In Greek, it's Bethphage, but I just like to say that word, so I just want to say it's Bethphage. Sound like beef jerky to me, I don't know. "To the Mount of Olives, when Jesus sent two disciples, saying to them, 'Go to the village opposite you, and immediately y'all will find a female donkey tied on a colt with her. Y'all untie them, and y'all bring them to me.' And so they go and they do all that. They brought the donkey and the colt and placed their cloaks on them, and he sat on them." The assumption meaning he sat on the colts. He sat on the cloaks. Now, this event happened probably about a week before Passover. If it were on Sunday, and many scholars think it was on a Sunday, we can date that for various reasons I can't go into in here. We can date that to April 2nd, AD 30. April 2nd, AD 30, if it's on a Sunday. He entered Jerusalem from the east, from Bethphage, and he came riding on probably the colt with a mother accompanying to calm the colt down. Now, we have to think about something very clearly, and that is the role of kings in ancient Judaism. The most popular way to think about kingship to a Jew was King David. The ideology surrounding the kingship of David was very entrenched and very important for most Jews in the ancient world. You can go to texts like 2 Samuel 7, 1 Kings 2, 1-4, Psalm 2, 72. And there's many texts that speak of God's promise that someone from the lineage of King David, he will reign on a throne forever. And that became very important for the average Jew in the ancient world, that someone from the line of David, in fact, they called someone from the line of David the sons of God, and he would be appointed and anointed by God himself to rule. Now, what's interesting in this text is, listen how in Matthew 21 here, that it sounds so much like that kind of kingship and royalty, especially Davidic royalty, someone from the line of David. So Jesus is riding on a donkey, and that could connote and denote being a king, especially if you read Zechariah 9:9, where this king comes on peacefully on a donkey. Not a triumphant horse, but a donkey, and that's to demonstrate peace as he comes in to rule and reign. So riding on a donkey demonstrates royalty. Laying down your cloaks for a person could demonstrate royalty. If you go to 2 Kings 9:13, they laid down their cloaks for the king to come. Third, Jesus is called the Son of David in 21:9. Remember that? In 21:9 it says, "And the crowds that went before him and that followed him shouted, 'Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest.'" So he's called the Son of David. It doesn't mean literally David's his daddy. Sonship means he has the office. That's a Davidic king. He is the Davidic king. So he's from the lineage of David. That's a biggie. The fourth is, it's not made explicit in the text that it's messianic. That is, there were several Jewish texts about this time period that spoke about the Messiah coming from the east. And Jesus coming from Bethphage comes from the east. So you put these four things together in this notion of kingship with 3 kingship implications and 1 messianic implication. You see this together, that Matthew is deliberately portraying Jesus as this royal figure from the line of David who has come back to Jerusalem to claim his throne. Now, it's really important to understand that idea of Davidic kingship is nuanced by Jesus. For example, there's an obvious absence of violence or conquering. Notice that all these images are about a peaceful king. He's not a triumphant king. And in the ancient world, they had triumphant entries of when the emperors and Greek and Roman kings would come back from conquering their wars. They would ride on their big horses and a big fanfare and a massive parade, and they had huge feasts and sacrifices. That's not what's happening here. He's not coming as a conquering king. So amazingly, Jesus here is not, he's royalty, but he's not, his royalty is not demonstrated by conquering people, but by defending the outcast. Maybe he'll go to the temple and say, you den of bandits and robbers. We'll talk about that in a second. He defends the outcast. He dies as a servant, giving his life as a ransom. Therefore, Jesus is royalty, but he's not the conquering type. That's really important to understand. He is royalty. He's a king. He's a Jewish king, anointed by God the Father, but he's not the conquering type. Now, that matters because when you put other messianic claimants, other people in the time period before, during, and after Jesus, other people who thought other people were messiahs, and people who claimed to be messiahs, most of them, including other prophetic figures before, during, and after Jesus, most of these figures, and there are dozens of them, use military force to say, that's how you know God is on my side. I will beat up the Romans or the foreign pollutants. I'll kick them out. It's really powerful that Jesus has none of that. He has none of that. He's not the conquering type of royalty. Now, verses 8 through 9, I want to make sure we pay attention to this one more time. But most of the crowd spread their garments on the road. They cut off branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds went and said, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest, Hosanna to the Son of David, and so forth. Now, palm branches were associated with national identity in Judaism. We know this because if you look at Jewish coins of the time period, there are palm branches on them. It's kind of like waving the American flag if Jesus were to walk in, or if Obama would have come in when he got elected, we waved American flags. They did wave American flags, but palm branches have a national identity. More importantly, this is really key to understand. About 100 years before this event, about 130 years before this event, around 163, 165 BC, when the Jews were taken over again by foreign, we call them pollutants, people who took over that area, they required that the Jews stop doing things that allowed them to be Jews. And when one Antiochus Epiphanes, when he came in and said, I'm going to kill a pig on the temple, which is, of course, you don't ever do. He killed a pig. He stopped people from being circumcised. He prohibited the reading of the Torah and so forth. This was an outrage. And when he sent other little puppet priests to go do these new things all through Israel, this one group of people, this one family named, one guy in particular named Judas Maccabeus, he and his family said, enough is enough. And in their zeal, as the Jewish texts talk about it, in their zeal, they killed the priest on the altar he had just killed a pig on. They kill him, they kill all the people who are around him, and they go on a guerrilla warfare campaign. And they're about 3 years, they actually win. They push back all the foreign powers. They go back to the temple. Judas Maccabeus goes to the temple to purify the temple of the foreign pollutants, the junk inside the temple, but also the foreign occupying people. And he pushes them out. And you would know it, wouldn't you, that when Judas Maccabeus in 165 BC is going to the temple to purify the temple of the foreign pollutants, guess what they waved as he entered in Jerusalem? Palm branches. Palm branches. That event, the new rededication of the temple, is celebrated every year, and it was celebrated back then as well, and it was called the Feast of Dedication, the Festival of Dedication, or the Dedication Festival. Sometimes you'll hear it called the Festival of Lights. That comes from one Jewish work, a guy named Josephus, and it's not very clear why he uses that word. Most Jews call it the Dedication Festival. That's what it's called in John 10:22. And you might also know it by this other word, Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival of dedication. And it is a celebration that the Jews celebrated every single year to remind them of the time when Judas Maccabeus came to the temple and rededicated the temple to God and made it sacred again. There's no way that Jesus' audience is not thinking of the exact same thing. There's no way they're not thinking in their mind, woohoo, here we are again. This is it. He's going to come purify the temple. He's going to kick them all out. We're going to have national independence again. By the way, Judas Maccabeus and his little military fought off to about 163 BC, and then they were, of course, beaten by the Romans. Israel would not have its own independence again from 163 BC until 1948. was declared in 48. I think it became ratified in 49. But anyway, let's say 48. So from 163 BC to 1948, the Jews will not have independence. So every year that goes on, they're re-celebrating independence over and over and over. And here comes Jesus, and they're waving their palm branches, and whoo, and he's on a donkey, a colt of all things, because we all know kings ride them in, and we're so excited about that. In fact, they're screaming out, Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna. Hosanna is a Greek, this is kind of confusing. Hosanna is a Greek way of saying two Hebrew words, which mean, oh help, or oh save us. And it probably comes from texts like Psalm 118:25. Oh help, or oh save us. And to one degree they mean it, come save us. To another degree it's like just a cry of acclamation. We're so excited he's here. So they're convinced that he's going to come into the temple. This all matters, what I just said, because, again, they're wrong. Their expectations are wrong because Jesus redefines it. So they're expecting him to liberate the temple from foreign pollutants. However, instead of driving out the Romans, Jesus condemns the religious establishment. He condemns the religious establishment. So imagine if you're the crowd who's so excited, and here he enters into the temple, and they go, yay, go get him! And the Fortress Antonia, which is where the local Roman garrison was located, especially during Passover and this season. They didn't always stay there, but they were moved there during the high festival times. They get appointed, go get him, Jesus, you know where the Romans are. And he goes right to the temple. And he does something that is quite different. He tries to get rid of religious leadership. So he goes in, let's flash forward here to verse 12. And Jesus entered the temple of God and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, it's written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers, a den of bandits, a den of thieves. Bandits are probably the best way. So he enters in from the southern Huldah gates. If he did that, he would have come across this enormous, called a royal portico, a royal stoa. This is a massive, long hall with four rows of about 40 columns. I mean, it had been gargantuan. It had been a really, really big, huge outer area of the temple. And there he encountered something like a marketplace. It wasn't technically a marketplace like you would experience out in the regular cities and towns, but it was something like a marketplace. This is really important to understand. The marketplace provided necessary goods, necessary services. So, for visiting Jews and for the poor. Now, what do you mean necessary services? Well, let me reflect on a few points, so we'll wrap up. First, Jerusalem during the time of Passover, we know from other Jewish sources, probably would have swollen up to about 10 times its normal capacity. Imagine New Year's Eve in Times Square in New York, or Mardi Gras. People flooded in. Now you flood in, it builds up energy already. But you mix with that Passover and the festival dedication and on. People wanted to see God do a new big thing, especially because the Romans were always watching over them. That is, most Jews. Not all Jews thought that. Some Jews were happy with the situation. So it flooded. A lot of people were been around. Secondly, Jewish males were required to pay a small temple tax of about a half a shekel in Exodus 30, 11 to 16. Now, you paid a half shekel because it went to the temple treasury, and it paid for the sacrifices that were used to pay for the sins of all the people. It's what the priests would do behind the scenes. They kind of helped you. So if you didn't come and do it's a particular sacrifice that allowed public forgiveness for Jews all over the place. And so you help pay the bill. It's a half shekel. The problem was, if you came from other parts of Jerusalem, and many Jews did, they came from all over down to Jerusalem. When they came in with their foreign currency, that foreign currency typically was not stable in its value. Just like today, money goes up and down in its value. So when they got to the temple, they couldn't pay the half shekel because sometimes if their money was so devalued, it wasn't even worth a half shekel. So they would change their money. They would exchange the money like we do today. And they got the Tyrian drachm. The Tyrian drachm was made out of silver, and it typically held its value very well. Well, one Tyrian drachm is worth about a half shekel. Well, that's the temple tax. So you could get money exchanged, and you use those Tyrian drachms. You would use those to purchase animals for sacrifice. Why does that matter? Well, because the idea is that most Jewish males, they would take the animal into the temple to pay to have it sacrificed. The problem is you couldn't travel all that way from wherever you came from and make sure that your animal didn't get blemished. And so you just bring some cash with you, and you show up at the temple and say, okay, I'll buy that one. And so it would have looked and smelt like kind of like a petting zoo when you walked in. There would have been animals, thousands of them. And so you buy animals, you buy doves. That's what poor people could buy. They could afford a big animal, so they afford doves. Another thing is, later on in rabbinic tradition, it seems to strongly suggest that this whole little marketplace system was a recent occurrence under Caiaphas, the chief priest of the time, that it was recent. So it could be that this is what Jesus also opposes, that he doesn't like that it's new. The point is, we have necessary services for the Jews, but why did he get so upset? Jews had different views of the temple. Some Jews felt it was just hopelessly corrupt, like the group called the Essenes at the Dead Sea. The Essenes, they're hopeless. The Jerusalemites are hopeless. They weren't against the temple. They were against the religious leadership. Then you have other people like the Sadducees who said the temple is very, very good, and so are the religious leadership. By the way, they were the religious leadership, the Sadducees. So you have a spectrum of Jewish perspective of the temple. Well, Jesus' actions and condemnations let us know he's also on the spectrum. His is negative. He's more like an Essene. But it is genuinely unclear if Jesus is opposed to the temple at large, that is, having a temple in the first place, or is he opposed to this temple, or is he not opposed to the temple? Is he opposed to something particular about the temple? It's unclear. So why does he pick this marketplace to go in there and overturn these tables? Why do this kind of thing? Well, every scholar agrees that he's acting symbolically. What does I mean by that? Why can Jesus really be trying to stop it? Because as soon as Jesus overturned the tables, money goes flying and people stop, guess what they would have done? They would have picked up the tables and started selling again. In other words, there's no way he's literally trying to stop the practices forever. It's a symbolic gesture. Prophets have always done that. Remember Jeremiah? He takes Jeremiah from several hundred years way before this event. He took clay pots and he burst them. And that demonstrated symbolically, not that he hates pottery, but that it's a symbolism that judgment's coming to Jerusalem. So it's a symbol for Jesus. Well, I'll say this last thing as we wrap up. There are many options available for us as we interpret what does it mean symbolically that he overturns the tables. Scholars do not agree. It's a hotly debated topic. But of all the stuff I've read and all of my own thoughts, it seems to me that three are very likely. Three reasons seem why Jesus picked on the marketplace, as it were. One, the market distracted people from the true purpose of the temple. It distracted people. And so we see in 21:13, remember he says, my house should be called a house of prayer. So maybe Jesus is saying they can't do that with all this nonsense going on. Maybe that's one thing. Two, the market demonstrated the temple's religious leadership was corrupt. Remember in 21:13, the same verse, he says, but you've turned to a house of, a den or a cave of bandits. That is, maybe somehow they're taking advantage of people. Three, the possibility the market represented the sacrificial system. It was like the bloodline. It represented the sacrifice, which then now Jesus now considered obsolete with his own death. Remember his own death, he himself considers himself to be the ransom. He considered himself to be that lamb. It seems to me that all these are true at various levels. That he thinks that it does distract people, he is condemning religious leadership, and he does think that the temple overall has lost its true function. Remember, right after this, later on, Jesus will go by a fig tree, and he will curse that fig tree, and it will wither. And it's the only miracle Jesus ever performed that it was negative. It killed something. And that withering of a fig tree represents the temple. So I don't think Jesus is just picking on marketplace. In fact, I think what he's doing is it's a broader symbolic gesture that the temple itself and its sacrificial system has lost its true function. On those notes, I want to ask one quick question. If Jesus came into our church or he came into your home and he started overturning tables, what would he overturn? What would he need to overturn in your life now to be a true disciple? God bless you. I'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to today's Glimpse of the Kingdom. If you want more theological reflections, go to davidpendergrass.com. If you want me to come out to your church or to help your organization with consulting, go to davidpendergrassconsulting.com.